We'll begin in just a second, letting everyone in.
All right.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us for Where We're Going. This series from ThinkND explores this point in time and how the work happening through Notre Dame's campus relates to and impacts the US and the world at large. My name is Mary Scott, and I'm the Alumni Education Programs Director here at the Notre Dame Alumni Association. If you missed last week's Campus Viewpoint on sports, it's posted on ThinkND. Today, we'll continue to the discussion and we'll explore the world of sports with three distinguished speakers who've also previously been guest speakers to our undergraduate students. Before we get started, please remember if you have questions for our guest speakers, please use the Google form that we're sharing with you now. And now I'd like to welcome back our moderator for today's discussion from the Mendoza College of Business, Chris Stevens. Chris is a 1974 Notre Dame graduate and a current assistant teaching professor and the co-founding director of the Inspired Leadership Initiative. While at Notre Dame, Chris played basketball for Coach Digger Phelps, and then before returning to campus in his faculty role, he was one of the three original founders of Keurig. Chris, I know you're going to ask our guests about their specific sport or league restart plans following the coronavirus pandemic. But as a consumer of sports, what are your thoughts about the way that Wnba, NBA, MLB, NFL, and others have handled their starts or their restarts?
Well, Mary, I think it's pretty amazing in terms of what they've been able to do, from the PGA Tour starting in June and being able to finish their season, obviously in a very, very different way, but for the NBA and the WNBA and the NHL, all to be able to complete their seasons in a bubble type of a format. I think it's been pretty amazing. And then football and baseball have had to kind of deal with a pandemic world as they travel around and try to go to the stadium. So I think so far, given the severity of this outbreak, it's been pretty amazing what sports have been able to do. So with that, I want to welcome everyone to the second edition of Where We're Going in Sports. And I'd like to thank and welcome back all of those who participated last week, and welcome all of those of you who are first-time callers. I think you're going to really enjoy the panel discussion we're going to have today. So as you all know, in March of this year, our world changed in so many ways, and scores of industries were dramatically affected, none more so than the world of sports. At amateur sports, spring sports were canceled, which was particularly painful for high school and college seniors who were denied then the last chance to be able to earn a college scholarship or to be drafted by a pro team. Youth sports were also canceled. Online learning and social distancing replaced in-class engagement and on-field competition. And while the NCAA granted college seniors an additional year of eligibility, no such option was available to high schoolers. At the professional level, seasons were postponed, revenues were devastated, organizations were forced to downsize, and some sports, such as minor league baseball, were not just postponed, they were canceled altogether. After enduring virtual lockdowns, as the economy began to reopen, sports leagues and teams plotted how to salvage seasons in swing, and in the case of football, planned how to open safely. Commencing with the reopening and reshaping of the PGA Tour in June, roaring revenue-generating fans were replaced by mask-wearing staffs and participants. Shortened seasons and adjusted playoff plans were conducted near empty stadiums and arenas. Some leagues survived in bubbles, while others were forced to navigate in a pandemic-filled society, practicing safely the best actions that they could take. Our three panelists today were on the front line of these challenges in both the college level and professional level, and also in terms of sports venues. Their insights about how they help save the NBA, the WNBA, and the NHL seasons, as well as the start of fall college sports, will provide a glimpse of what the longer-term outlook for sports will be. And I'm thrilled that they've been able to join us here today. So with that, our distinguished panel today will address these issues and more over the course of the next 50 minutes. And we're grateful that you have chosen to join us as we seek to shed some light on just where we're going in sports. So let's meet our panel. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read their very impressive bios, as you can see them on ThinkND, as well as we've emailed them to you. But joining us are Allison Barber, who's President and Chief Operating Officer of the Indiana Fever WNBA team. Stan Wilcox, a 1981 Notre Dame grad and the NCAA Executive Vice President for Regulatory Affairs. And Raul Fernandez, who is Vice Chairman and owner of Monumental Sports that own both the NBA Washington Wizards, the WNBA Washington Mystics, the NHL Washington Capitals, as well as the Capital One Arena. I want to welcome Raul, Allison, and Stan, and also we also have Sashi Brown, who's the Chief Operating Officer for Basketball Operations for Monumental, who will be joining us later on the call. So let me start with Raul. Raul, I know that you have, for the first part of the program, I'd just like to ask you about how your organization was impacted. I mean, you had 3 teams in 3 different sports, arenas which remain empty even as we speak. So let's take the NBA first. The 2020 NBA bubble was created by the NBA to protect its players from COVID-19. 22 of the 30 NBA teams were invited to participate, including the Wizards, with games being held behind closed doors at the ESPN Wide World of Sports complex, and the teams staying at the Disney World hotels. So now that the NBA season is complete, and you reflect back on this, what's your takeaway from this experience, Raul?
Well, thank you so much, and so happy to be here and share thoughts as we are all unfortunately going through things that we never thought we would have to go through and deal with. And I think one of the things that has been positive is really the collaboration across communities and across companies and across different organizations. As you mentioned, 2 of our teams, our NBA team and our NHL team, had to stop with roughly 2 to 4 weeks left in the regular season. So that was a benefit for us in the sense that we had most of our season behind us. We had a lot of home games still, but we only had to finish, a relatively small part of our season when we got into the bubbles. Really what led the creation of the NBA bubble was data and trying to be patient and trying to figure out at what time and what location would be the best combination to bring a group of athletes, trainers, coaches together, the smallest possible, but yet everything that we needed to make it safe for everyone. And we did that through a lot of discussion, a lot of interaction. We looked at the different testing that was available at the time. We were super sensitive to have access to the testing, but also have no impact on the availability of testing in the broader community. And as we put it together at the NBA in Orlando and NHL in Canada, we really held, I think, tight to some principles of making sure that we kept, things that we're told every day and we work with every day, which is safe distance, masks, the testing regimen to get in the bubble in terms of the fast test and the PCR test spaced together so that if for some reason you've had exposure to the virus, but you have not had it build to a critical level. That I think was great in both the NBA and the NHL. As you got into the bubble, you had that clearance in the beginning, and that really helped not just keep those inside safe, but the everyday testing of both players and anyone that was interacting also added to that. The WNBA also started the season and made it through the whole cycle, and again, I think taking learnings from those of us that were a little bit faster, not faster, but just slightly ahead. From a timeline standpoint. But as I mentioned in the beginning of this, we are all learning and we're all sharing. And so we are getting information from the various leagues. I just saw a great picture of a baseball game last night where there was some limited fans in the stands. We've had some football games where we've had fans in suites. But we're all trying to achieve that balance of having some fans, which is so important, in terms of adding life to the game as it's happening, but also making sure that everyone is safe and comfortable. And obviously, we're all dealing with multiple jurisdictions, and so there really is not a one size fits all approach.
Allison, you had to deal with the same challenges at the Indiana Fever. I'd love to have your thoughts on this as well.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. It's great to be with all of you today. What was interesting and maybe a little bit different, in my opinion, for the WNBA compared to some of the other sports teams is that really we had to run scenarios from the get-go. And one scenario was, what if we postpone the season because we hadn't started a season? And so when COVID was happening and the season for the Pacers and the NBA was halted, we came together as leaders with our new commissioner, Kathy Engelbert, and said one scenario is postpone the season, but we looked at what the trade-off of that would be. And we really believed that if we didn't have a WNBA season, we might actually lose the league. Like if we didn't stay relevant, if we didn't stay in the game, it would be really hard to bring WNBA games back and to keep our fans engaged. You know, our league is only will be 25 years old. So it's still in its infancy when you think about sports franchises and teams. And so we immediately pivoted from that scenario to how do you create a safe bubble and invite players to be a part of it. And I think this is where Raul got at this too. The success of our seasons was because we've all had the opportunity to build loyal fans who stayed with the teams and supported us. We have amazing athletes who were willing to go into these bubbles that were, it was not an enjoyable environment. As good as everybody worked to make it, first of all, healthy and safe, which I think the records will show there was great success against those two principles and guidance. But the actual environment of not being able to get out of the bubble, not being with family and friends, not having fans, it took a toll on the players. And then the next level of, I know we'll talk about this, but the next level then of the social unrest. And so you think about when in life you go through crisis, and when any of us go through crisis, one of the first people we turn to are our family. Well, all of our players in the bubble couldn't be with their family. And so not to feel sorry for anybody, just to say that there were additional opportunities to demonstrate this athletic mindset of discipline, principle, focus, and setting goals and working together at those goals. So we had, it was a complicated summer to say the least, but I'm proud of our athletes across the entire league, both WNBA and NBA, the leaders, the owners who had to invest beyond expectation. And the reason it's so important is because sports plays, as you mentioned, Chris, such a vital role in the psyche of our country. And so that's what we found was really the value. We had no idea the platform we would have to talk about important societal issues when we went into the bubble. But, there are a lot of people that get tremendous credit for finding a pathway, paying for the pathway, and then executing the bubble. So it was, we've learned a lot from it.
So Stan, I kind of leading off of that, I just can't imagine how challenging it must have been as you were coming through the summer with the different conferences, trying to make decisions about, do we play, do we not play, do we cancel fall sports, with the pandemic raging like crazy in certain parts of the country, but not in other parts of the country. Can you tell us a little bit about, the thought process that the NCAA went through in terms of the decisions that you've made to be able to allow fall sports to continue for the most part?
Sure. The one thing you have to know is that the NCAA does not govern the regular season for our institutions. But what the Board of Governors, which is the highest authority of the NCAA, one of their requirements are, one of the things that they oversee is to make sure that our student athletes, the health and safety and the welfare of our student athletes are being attended to by all of our institutions. So the first thing that we had to do, or that the Board of Governors did, was, after we had canceled the winter and spring championships last year, and then looking into the fall, what they had to do was say, well, if anyone wants to go and participate in the fall, have fall sports, well, we have to come up with guidelines that must be followed to protect the health and safety of our student athletes. And that was the first thing that the Board of Governors did. Our Chief Medical Officer, Brian Hainline, put together an advisory committee that basically were some of the top experts across the country in the area of health and safety. And which also included later on the same with the various different conferences having similar committees having representation on this larger NCAA committee. And that group came out with guidelines that had to be followed if you were going to pursue and have fall sports. So as you probably saw, many Division II, Division III, and even some Division I institutions all decided that they would not either play fall sports or they delayed the start of fall sport. And the one that the most everyone kind of focused in on was football, and the schools that play football at the highest level. And you even saw there where some conferences decided that they could follow these guidelines, along with obviously the local authorities, their local CDC authorities, and what they would have to meet there, and felt that they could follow those guidelines and start their seasons. And then you had other conferences to follow. So what the NCAA was able to do was basically put together a roadmap for any schools. If you are going to have fall sports, well, these are the things you have to make sure you have in place to make sure that the health and safety of our student athletes is paramount. And they also put into effect basically what was called a COVID-19 hotline, in which any individual, any student, parent, and anybody could call this hotline and basically lodge a complaint or provide information where they know that a school may not be following or might be doing things inappropriately. And then we at the NCAA National Office would then follow up with that to make sure that the school is aware of it and that they are going to make some changes. So it's definitely been a challenge because of the fact that we're not just dealing with schools that are at the Division I level, we're dealing with Divisions I, II, and III. But as we move forward, we're now in the process of creating the same kind of guidelines for sports that will be starting in the winter as well as going into the spring.
That's great. So, hey, Raul, I know that you make a lot of your income based on the arena, and that arena has been vacant for all this time, but you're having to look at new revenue generating opportunities like esports. It's become one of the fastest growing segments in the sports world, as well as sports betting. Can you maybe shed a little bit of light about how Monumental is playing in those games?
Sure. Yeah, we've been direct and indirect investors in various parts of the esports ecosystem, specifically directly, and a big win for us, and I think a big win for esports in general. Our NBA 2K team was successful this year in winning the championship about a month ago. And we had over 2 million viewers that watched that championship round. So the growth of other content that's affiliated directly with, in this case, the NBA, and in other cases not. We've got an ownership in Team Liquid and some other organizations as well. We see that as a big opportunity, and we do see it as a place where sports competition and esports it can intersect. But yes, in the district was one of the jurisdictions that moved very quickly once the Supreme Court allowed for sports betting to be done at a local level. And we moved very quickly, and we entered into a relationship with William Hill, which now is in the process of a transaction with Caesars. But William Hill was a pioneer in sports betting in Europe. And as they were continuing to open operations in the United States, they saw it as a great place as entities and municipalities were allowing this to happen. They saw Washington, they saw Monumental Sports, and they saw Capital One Arena as a great place to grow. So as we entered the year, we had plans to continue the build out. The destination will be a sports betting restaurant and bar, and obviously a place where you can watch all sorts of games all over the world. And that build out continues. It will be ready, and once we're able to get back in the building and have occupancy, people will be able to enjoy it. But in the interim, again, COVID, I think, has forced a lot of rethinking and a lot of creative thinking, which has been great. In the interim, we opened up what was our will call area for tickets and our ticketing window, and we dropped a small, basically a pop-up for sports betting. And we opened that up with a very, very soft launch in August. And as of last week, it's the second highest grossing sports book in the United States for William Hill. There are lines around the corner, and there's a tremendous amount of activity there. And again, this is makeshift. It's fully pop-up, but I think you see people wanting to engage in sports, wanting to bet on games, wanting to bet within a game. And so that's a big ray of hope, not just for the original thesis that we had, but that once we are able to open up, people are going to come in droves.
So thanks, Raul, and you might have a comment on this too. Allison, you had not just the summer teams of baseball to compete against for visibility and stuff. You had the NBA, you had the NHL, and despite that, you had a 68% increase in average viewership for the WNBA teams. How did the WNBA achieve such popularity in such a cluttered time?
Well, we had a pent-up need and interest in the W. A lot of credit to the teams in the W. The Mystics came off of a huge win last season and there's a lot of momentum around that. The draft class this season was so strong that there was interest around watching these recently graduated college women come into the W. So we were fortunate enough to have some really strong momentum going into the season. And then we had the great work of the commissioner. Leadership matters, and she was able to bring in some strong partners and negotiate. She was a former president of Deloitte in New York City, first female to ever have that role. So negotiating deals and working hard against strategic metrics is kind of that's in her sweet spot. So she was able to really work with ESPN, with CBS Sports, with Facebook to get more visibility. It is one of those experiences when you provide a way for fans to follow and watch the game, they actually do follow and watch the game. In Indiana, we were the first team in the country to stream all of our games at no cost to our fans. Wow. Well, we did that. We did it because we should. We're the Indiana Fever, not the Indianapolis Fever. So if we want to inspire kids and motivate young girls to stay in sports, but the best way to do that is to activate the opportunity for girls and fans to see the game. So if you weren't in Indianapolis prior to this year, you would never see a Fever game on television outside of Indianapolis. So we said, that's not workable. That doesn't accomplish our goals. We streamed all of our games, and we went from, about 300,000 typical viewers to over 700,000 viewers per game, 1,700 households every game. So we're teaching ourselves that people want to be fans of the W. We just need to be more aggressive and proactive in making it available because, it's a baseball story, right? If you build it, they will come. That doesn't always work in business, but what we saw this summer is it worked for the W and it worked well.
Yeah. And Chris, I think, and this is a great also path to get Sashi on as well, because as you know, I can't attend the complete conference here, but I think incredible content, competition, brands, everything that WNBA has built, the NHL, the NBA, and authenticity. I think these players have real stories, and especially now, the backdrop of everything that we're dealing with, they connect. They connect with people. They connect with kids. They connect with all of us that are just trying to compete in many different ways and win in many different ways. So authenticity, and I think the thing that also that we've been accelerated is in experimenting how we interact with the consumer more directly, how we can get more engaged. And I think COVID has ignited that across many verticals, education, obviously, number one, but definitely in sports. So I think when the world finishes rebooting, we'll all be in a better place and hopefully even more connected.
Well, thank you, and Raul, for being able to join us. So let me kind of pivot the next question then to Sashi. Sashi, as the Chief Planning and Operations Officer for Monumental, you're obviously very, very close in terms of basketball, but I know you also had quite a run with the Cleveland Browns football team. Any thoughts relative to how you see, or have you been giving any indication about how the next season is going to start off for the NBA and for the NHL?
I think there's a lot at play there, to be honest, Chris, and the safety protocols continues to be a learning experiment. I mean, we're looking at testing and various technologies obviously, as Stan mentioned, we're all in very close contact with our arena authorities or stadium authorities and local health officials as well. So it's a very complex mix. Our leagues are very engaged with our unions as well, and they have interests at play to make sure that the protocols that teams put in place, that leagues put in place, keep our players healthy, which is first and foremost. But my reflection is, on the spring 2020, just such a difficult year for our entire society, and sports is no exception, as we documented here in the discussion. But I'd also say how clearly intertwined we all are. Media, fans, athletes, sponsors, arena, and teams all really are part of one big organism. And we have figured out ways to work together and have different and deeper dialogues and work together to find solutions and stay agile and as creative as we can. It's been really important. We've emphasized communications with our players, with our fans, with our partners at the city, as well as Raul mentioned. And it's been a big challenge, but it's also an opportunity to deepen a lot of those and reinforce a lot of those relationships.
Thanks, Sashi. We all are very much aware of how much more on the forefront the issues of racial and social injustice are in our country. And, we're seeing athletes really take the lead, I think, in terms of trying to be able to help make a difference and help change things. What kinds of things, and I open this up to all of you, what kinds of things do you see that are happening, do you think are really going to help us produce real change in this country?
I'll start with that. I think if you look anytime in history, real change comes through a few things, and it's steadfast focus, continued commitment. I think about women's right to vote. We just celebrated women's right to vote 100 years. But if you look at the history there, it took over 60 years for the women to get a piece of legislation to be enacted. So 60 years of focus. And you look at that and say, okay, and look how far women have come. Still more room to go, but it takes this steadfast focus, commitment, dedication to making change come about for the good of society. I think what you saw, what we all witnessed this summer, is this beginning of more engagement. And really, Chris, to your point, it's like, how do you make change happen? You make it happen one day at a time, every day at a time. So it's that drumbeat. Where some of the disconnect could be is that we had sometimes with players, they thought if they wore a t-shirt with a saying, or if they tweeted something to all their followers, that might be enough to change the outcome or to change the conversation. Those are important elements and tactics, but you don't change society one tweet at a time, one t-shirt at a time. You change it through concentrated effort. And that's really the value of being in the bubble, in my opinion, was that all the teams were together to work in concert around issues and to motivate and inspire each other. So when they came out of the bubble, the conversation didn't end. It continues. And that's how change will come about, in my opinion.
Stan, your thoughts?
At the collegiate level, we are very, very inspired by our student athletes and seeing everything that they have been doing over this past 6 to 7 months or so. The student athlete voice is very important. And it's always been important to amplify that voice as it relates to NCAA changing in legislation, et cetera. But now you see the student athlete voice being pivoted to really focus in on social justice issues, not just from the various different things that you've seen some of the student athletes do with their coaches on campus or within their community, et cetera. But also, they're mimicking or they're following some of the things that have been happening on the professional level with coming up with unity patches on their uniforms, on their helmets, on the back nameplates. The thing about being at the being in college is that that's your time to really mature. That's the time for you to really explore and to think about how, once you leave that kind of environment, how are you going to make a change in society? And we're seeing that our student athletes are, and we're allowing, and we're really pushing student athletes to be out in the forefront with that. And what you're also starting to see is that that student voice is then also making change on campuses and within conferences by them speaking their mind and speaking about the issues that they see that that need to be changed, within athletics, collegiate athletics, not just on a national level, but at the local level as well. And so that's very encouraging, and you'll continue to see, I think, the student athlete's voice being amplified in this particular area.
Stan, if I could maybe just keep you for another question. Speaking of change, there's always change coming, and part of the change that you're having to deal with is the whole issue of name, image, and likeness. And with the California legislation, and now with different states being able to, getting all kinds of bills being introduced, where do you see the whole issue of name, image, and likeness going in the future?
Well, it's definitely going to happen. We're in the process right now of really kind of negotiating and talking through with members of Congress and the Senate who are looking to put together bills that will preempt the various different states that have come up with bills, because there's no way that we as an entity can operate with 50 different state laws surrounding name, image, and likeness. So we're working with the federal government on that, and you will definitely see that student athletes will have the opportunity to be able to benefit from their name, image, and likeness. It's just now a matter of how do you put that together so that not just your top athletes are able to, kind of benefit from it, but all student athletes can benefit from it, as well as how do you make sure that we can maintain the uniqueness of our recruiting model that we have, so that you don't have inflated markets because certain individuals are trying to get certain prospects to attend their institution. How do you make sure that the transactions that are going to be occurring are transparent, so everybody knows that it's kind of above board? And so some of those really difficult challenges that we have to figure out, we're in the process of doing that. We've gotten support from the federal government, and in addition to the name, image, and likeness, what you'll probably also see along with that is a student athlete bill of rights that is being pushed by the federal government, and we'll be working with the federal government on coming up with what makes sense moving forward when you incorporate name, image, and likeness and any other issues surrounding the benefits of student athletes that need to be incorporated. So it's a lot of work. It's very difficult, but you will see this happening, I'd say, within the next year.
Got it. Sashi, I really am kind of curious. The Capital One Arena is a spectacular arena. Now that your NBA and your NHL seasons are over and WNBA seasons are over, what's the outlook? I know you will not just have sporting events there, but concerts and everything. What's the outlook for Capital One Arena in the future, you think?
Sure. So right now, interestingly, we have made, and came from ownership right down, we have made Capital One Arena a super center for voting in DC. And so early voting will go on there right up until time runs out. And then on election day, the arena will be open. And we felt like it provided an opportunity for a safer environment for folks to come and vote in the midst of this terrible pandemic. So we're happy to, in the immediate moment, in this acute challenge that we all face, to make our arena available. And that's something that we were able to lead the charge on and actually advocate quite aggressively with the city alongside our players, I would note, who are also very vocal and instrumental in getting that decision made. For our jurisdiction, DC has done a nice job of trying to really listen to the scientists, and I would say have taken a more conservative approach than many other jurisdictions in terms of allowing large gatherings to take place. And so in many ways, we think of ourselves as first out, last back in is the way that we understand our reality will be. That meaning that for us to gather 15 to 20,000 people in very close proximity to each other, safety will be at the forefront of our fans. And so we know that we have a long road to get there. The trends aren't positive. And in the meantime, we have more or less shut down the facility. So our operations teams are maintaining it. We are in constant dialogue with the city, and we are, I think thoughtfully but aggressively exploring creative solutions to bring fans back into the building. And I'm sure we have all seen various technologies and companies out there that are promoting products and services to allow us to do that. And so that's a high priority for us. We want to get fans back. We want to get our games going, but not at the cost of risking fan safety.
Yeah. So I'm going to go a little bit off-road here. Allison, I think you've been quoted as saying that this is your 8th career as president and COO of the Indiana Fever. And this is an election year, and in 12 days or so, we're going to have the chance to be able to choose who we want to run the next 4 years of this country. You had some personal experience in the White House, and can you maybe share with us how that maybe helped prepare you for your current role?
Well, I did work in the Bush administration for 7.5 years and did 2 different stints at the White House. The longest stint was several months to set up an international press center in Iraq, which won me my all expense trips to Iraq. Not what I really wanted to do as an original first grade school teacher in Northwest Indiana. I'm not sure how I ended up in Iraq, but the point is, it taught me that, when I look at those experiences, some of the work we did popular, some very unpopular. You look at when you're in leadership roles, you have to have guiding principles. And I think that's what we see. Right. So some of what I learned is know what's important, set your principles, build a team around you that doesn't always look like you, think like you, process like you, because that's what keeps you on a path of success. If everybody thinks the way you think, then you'll never grow, you'll never develop, and more importantly, you'll never reach the audiences that need to be reached. And so, when you have the opportunity to work at a White House, you realize that just when you wake up in the morning, a large percentage of people are going to hate you just because you work at the White House. But you can't give up on people. And so you have to be principled, and you have to really maintain your optimism. I always vote for the American people. I always put my faith in Americans because there's something at the core that what we learn. And I think, politics aside, President Bush is a person. Always looked for the civility. And what we came through this summer, I think it drove me to remembering the importance of common civility. Of course, people are going to disagree. We need to disagree. Of course, there's going to be anxiety and passion. Nothing good in this world ever happens without passion. But what I've learned is that you've got to have leaders who have the voice that draw and motivate and inspire people to have common civility, because without that, change never happens.
Great. So Stan, if you think about it, young kids grow up in sports and families today, there's so many more organized sports. When we were younger, it was like, get out of the house and go to the playground, all right? Go occupy yourself. Now they're being driven from here to here and league to league and team to team. But a lot of that has stopped, and it's stopped for a period of time, which in the lives of youth is a long, long period of time. What do you think will be the long-term effect of this on some of our young people?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, one thing I do hope that, the changes from our time to now that I hope that maybe changes back. And that is, nowadays the parents have been driving their kids into like one sport. and they really try to concentrate on that, their kids on that one sport to hopefully eventually get them to be able to get scholarships to college to participate in that sport. What you see is that you see more injuries that are occurring by young athletes because they're not getting a diverse opportunity in other sports. You know, when you and I grew up, we probably played basketball, football, and baseball. You know, nowadays, you know, they concentrate on one. You know, the hope is, you know, that they start realizing, or maybe get back to allowing students, these kids to really explore not just the one sport, but other sports. Because as you get to the collegiate level, what you'll start to see is you start to see that these sports are not diverse as they ought to be, in at least in my mind, and a lot of that is because of the fact that they're driving their kids into one sport. But hopefully, you know, I don't know if I had the magic wand coming out of this. Parents will begin to make sure that their kids are getting opportunities and not just the one in the one particular area. You know, right now recruiting, our coaches, they're very resourceful. They'll find the top athletes in the various different sports. But I think a lot of coaches also really appreciate those athletes who were not just the one sport athletes, but were athletes that do have a rounded background and participated in other sports.
Yeah. So analytics is driving so much of what's going on in sports today, metrics, analytics, timing, et cetera. But when you think about looking at players, and Stan, you had this opportunity as an athletic director at Florida State just before your current responsibilities, and you know, Sasha, you have this, and Allison, you've got this. What are some of the things that you look for in a player beyond the stats?
Well, for me, it's as an athletic director and being a part of the recruiting when kids come on campus, I'm looking for character. I'm looking for how this individual, you know, what is their background? What is their family background? And how did that build their character? Because on campus, I found myself, many athletic directors find themselves dealing with a very small percentage of kids, and it's usually the kids that are having issues, whether disciplinary issues or, you know, other issues. And you like to spend your time not having to deal with those types of situations or those issues, but a lot of times you're pulled into that. And so when you are looking at bringing kids into your programs, you want to make sure that you're really taking a look at their character, you know, their moral compass, you know, what kind of background are they coming from, and can they adjust to a new environment, an environment that may not be the same as the one that they're coming from. And so those are some really, at least when I was being involved in recruiting, those are some things that I really looked at. And I loved it when the parents came, because you can figure out their character by seeing how they interacted around their parents, particularly their mothers. And so those were key things that I would always look for.
Allison, I noticed that Muffy has joined you there. Good to have Muffy on board. And Sasha, I'm just kind of curious, when you deal with things at a professional level, so when you're looking at drafting a player, again, you've got all the stats, you've got the analytics, et cetera. What are some of those intangible things that you look for as well, Sasha?
Yeah, Stan hit on a lot of it. I mean, the core of the person is vital. And we look at character two ways. One is your character as a person. The second is your sport character. So how committed, dedicated are you to get better, to sit on the bench when you're not playing well without pouting, to putting in the extra work that we need to, your resilience and your ability to get back on the court after an injury. All of those things we really try to measure. And I think all teams in the professional ranks are trying to figure out how to objectively measure that. And there's a lot of psychologists and others who would tell you they can, but frankly, none of us have figured that out in clear ways. So I think we certainly look at that. We also are doing a lot of work now with the technology and advancements in medical, in the medical area, in terms of, can you predict the biomechanics, the other factors that will contribute to sustainability in terms of performance in our sport, and it varies league to league, but certainly in baseball and basketball, we make decisions on whether we're going to pay a player the same amount of money regardless of his performance or his availability in terms of injury, for sometimes up to 6 or 7 years at very high dollars, which if he doesn't pan out is, or she doesn't pan out, prohibitive in terms of your ability to compete. So really digging in that area as well, Chris, in terms of trying to predict, manage risk at the end of the day, both on a personal level, but also on a performance level.
Yeah. Allison?
Well, at Fever, we built a structure. When Tamika Catchings, who's my vice president and now double Hall of Famer, came in, we said, let's have a framework. And so for us, it's commit, compete, and contribute. So we're looking for players who are committed to their personal development, to the sport, to the discipline. We're looking for players who compete at every level. And just the rigor for women, we finish our season, they go right overseas and they're playing overseas. So there's got to be the real competitive spirit. And then the contribution is, where do they show up in the community? Where are they giving back? Because we're building a championship culture. We'll win the championship in 3 years. I'm sure of it. That's what we're building to. But you can't have that win if you don't have the right culture. And so you have to put some framework, a rubric really in place to say, well, this is what we're measuring each player against. And it means we walk away from some really talented players because they do not meet up to that rubric.
Got it. So the name of this series is called Where We're Going in Sports. So if you're taking a look out post-pandemic world, we get a vaccine or two in early 2001 that can be broadly administered and stuff. Where do you see the world going in terms of sports, or at least maybe your league or your sport that you're in, or your company? Where do you see the future being for you?
I think for the W, I see our future being having W fans in all 50 states. So because of the bubble, we were able to have exposure beyond what we've ever had in the W. Our best day is when we have fans in every state, not in the 12 markets where we play. And it's different because fans who follow the W are typically, according to research, they're fans of the game, not fans of a player. So if you look at how people are, the fandom around male sports, it's usually around a special player, a significant player, that the fans really support that player wherever they go. It's not true in women's sports. And so we're using all the analytics to say, what do the fans of women's sports really connect with? And it's team culture. And so I believe that can transcend beyond our 12 markets, and needs to, for the real purpose, Chris, of inspiring kids to continue to play the game. Girls drop out of sports at the age of 11 and 12. They drop out because they want to go do something else. That's great. But if they drop out because they can't see themselves as a professional or college athlete or professional athlete, that's not satisfying. And so I think the future of the W is you will see a national league, a league that reaches people in every community across the country. And I do believe our fans will come back. They're loyal. We survey our fans constantly. We have since March, and they're ready to come back. We'll take precautions. They trust us because of the culture that we've created in our business and others. So I think we'll have fans back. But I think the real secret sauce will be that we have used technology to connect with more people in a way that will have impact and build this camaraderie around sports that we wouldn't have had pre-COVID.
Got it. Sashi.
Thanks. I'd agree. I was going to pick up there on Allison's last point. I think absolutely the technology that we have seen forced upon us in the creative solutions that our media partners, our sponsors, our leagues, our athletes have all put into place will have a continued acceleration in terms of its role across the industry for sure. And I think it'll drive a lot of innovation in the coming years. I also think we've kind of grown accustomed to be able to take for granted, so to speak, so many aspects of our lives as fans and athletes and just as citizens. And we have found, and I believe Allison has found the same, that if you look at just our season ticket holders, for instance, even in the face of all the uncertainty, financial challenges that families are facing, our season ticket holders have stuck with us through renewals and decided that they are wanting and ready to come back, and they don't want to lose that second row seat that they've worked so hard to get. And they're ready to see live sports. And as much as technology is going to drive us, I think we all know the pinnacle and what makes our sport exciting is that moment when you're in the stadium, when the event, when the moment, when the game-winning shot happens. And so I think you'll see a convergence of those two things, technology pushing us forward on many fronts, but also the core of what sport is really being preserved in many ways, maybe revived in some ways in terms of not being taken for granted so much.
Got it. Stan.
I think you're going to see, again, in collegiate athletics, it's all about the student athlete. We're all in it because of the fact that we are trying to mold young men and women to be productive in society. So we will see even greater emphasis being put on their education, on their well-being, well-being meaning financially, physically, mentally. You will see even more of a emphasis being put on the student athlete experience and making sure that student athlete experience is paramount, and that when they come to participate at the collegiate level, that they are being taken care of, not just on the playing field, but off the playing field, in the classroom, et cetera. I think that you'll see even a greater recommitment to assuring that our student athletes are getting the most that they can get out of their institution from an educational perspective, as much as they're putting into that institution from an athletic perspective. And college athletics now is a public trust, and everybody has an interest in seeing student athletes doing well and making sure that they are not being exploited. And you see that from the states, from the federal government, all kind of focusing in on this. And so I definitely see that it's going to get better for student athletes overall.
That's great. Well, we've just about run out of time. Let me just throw out one more thing, and that what's the biggest concern that you have facing you right now? Stan?
The biggest concern is really it's always, because we are over 1,000 institutions, divisions 1, 2, and 3,
yeah,
and creating legislation or creating rules that everybody can kind of coalesce around and agree upon to do those things that I say that are going to happen, better education, better financially, mentally, et cetera. To do those things, it takes some really good politicking to get people to get on the same page. So, I mean, for everything that we do, it's a struggle to some degree, because as I always say, watching NCAA legislation being made is like watching sausage being made, because everybody has to have a little bit of their ingredients in it, and it never looks the same as it started when it comes out at the other end. But That's always been something that's been a challenge for us, and I see that that will not change and that will continue because we have some major issues that we have to deal with.
Got it. Allison?
Because actually, it's an interesting question. The thing that I really ponder the most is how can we be a good steward of the momentum? How can we be a good steward of the visibility we've had for the WNBA and the fever across the state of Indiana and W nationally? How do we make more of that? How can we be a good steward of the influence and impact our players had around the issues of social justice? It would be just criminal to not build on that momentum. And so really that's what I think about as being a good steward of all of the really positive things that came out of what would otherwise be a negative situation of the COVID bubble and just the way it turned our business upside down. So that's what we put our hand to at the Fever, is really working hard to champion the good, be a steward for how to make more impact and keep moving forward.
Sasha, you have the last word.
Yeah, I think for the most part, we're past this concern, but we don't take our eyes off the ball, that there is the potential that this pandemic lingers. And that, as you mentioned, Chris, hopefully we'll have a vaccine sometime in 2021, but what if we don't? And what is the impact potentially on safety for all of us? And at some point, if we can't get fans back in, that has a major shift in terms of our labor negotiations, our revenues. And that's a global impact. Certainly it filters down. We've all felt it at the individual levels with colleagues that are no longer working alongside us. But I think the industry as a whole, the stress and pressure that's already been placed upon all of our sports at the athletic, amateur and professional levels is really critical for us to make sure that we find solutions for and plan for even the potentiality, as remote as it might seem, that we're out for a much longer period of time than we all.
Wow. Well, Sashi, Allison, Stan, Raul, and in absentia, thank you so much for you taking time from your day to be able to spend some time with us. It'll be an enlightening for our students when they have a chance to be able to check out this video and learn from you. And next week, we're going to have our third panel in this. And I want to first thank Mary and everybody at ThinkND and Dolly Duffy in terms of the Alumni Association for giving us a chance to be able to do this. But we're going to have next week a look from an international perspective. How are things in other parts of the world? So we're going to have 4 people who are either current leaders or were leaders in international sports. One is going to be Mr. Danny Medina, who's the Chief of Athletic Care and Performance for Monumental Sports. Kate Margraff, a All-American at Notre Dame here, and she's now General Manager of the U.S. Women's National Soccer Team. She played on several years for the soccer team. We'll also have Sitafas Savone. He was an 18-year veteran of the Spanish Pro League and a member of the Senegal national basketball team. And he'll bring his unique perspective to the table. And finally, we'll also have a head of basketball operation for Team USA basketball. So both the women's national soccer team and Team USA basketball play all over the world. And so they're going to hopefully be able to provide us an additional perspective. So we hope that you'll be able to join us. We thank you so much for being able to join us today. And join us next week at 9 o'clock, a little scheduling change, so we can take advantage of the people in Europe who will be coming on board. My name is Chris Stevens. It's been great to have you on board. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.